Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of a Sunday sermon on Monday. This week, the gospel was the beginning of St. Luke's gospel. It was obviously chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, and then chapter 4 through 14. It kind of bounces around a little bit. So I'll read it to you and then give you some thoughts to consider. Since many have undertaken to compile a narrative of the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as those who were eyewitnesses from the beginning and ministers of the word have handed them down to us, I too decided, after investigating everything accurately anew, to write it down in an orderly sequence for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may realize the certainty of the teaching you have received. Jesus returned to Galilee in the power of the Spirit, and news of him spread throughout the whole region. He taught in their synagogues and was praised by all. He came to Nazareth, where he had grown up, and went according to his custom into the synagogue on the Sabbath day. He stood up to read and was handed a scroll of the prophet Isaiah. He unrolled the scroll and found the passage where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring glad tidings to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim a year acceptable to the Lord." Rolling up the scroll, he handed it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all in the synagogue looked intently at him. And he said to them, "Today this scripture passage is fulfilled in your hearing." So for me, what kind of struck me was a couple of things, and I'll offer them to you humbly to see if it might stir your soul a little bit and give you something to experiment with this week. In the beginning, when he says, just as those who were eyewitnesses from the beginning, that word eyewitness really caught my attention, because I think to myself, when I'm in church and I listen to the readings, especially the gospel, sometimes I go through the motions. Sometimes I don't, I get distracted and I may not even hear what they read. I remember years ago, my mom, we would tell her we were going to 12 o'clock mass, and most times we would go, sometimes not, but she always tested us by saying, what was the gospel about? So we knew we had to kind of look it up and make sure we had that answer. But now as I get older, I really want to pay attention. So what I've begun to do is, when I hear that gospel reading, of Jesus in the New Testament, I really try to put myself there, almost that I'm an eyewitness, that I'm a character in this little story. I think that's going to give you some good focus. The other thing with St. Luke in the beginning here, you got to understand, Luke was the only non-Jew writing this, and he never knew Jesus. He came in 70 AD or whenever it was after Jesus. And he said, after investigating everything accurately anew. So you have to understand, he was a physician, right? So a very logical mind. Physicians deal in the facts. So he said, if I'm going to write this story about this man called Jesus, I got to make sure that I really have my facts. So I thought it was really interesting there to investigate accurately anew. And then he talks about realize the certainty of his teachings, right? The certainty of Jesus's teachings, which for me comes back to faith. And faith is defined as belief without proof. So when we live Jesus, right, viva Jesu, which is a Latin for it, do we have that inside of us, the real certainty of these teachings, where they came from, or do we just kind of go through the motions? This gospel really kind of snapped me out and caused me to ask myself, am I going through the motions, too much? I liked here, he said he came to Nazareth, where he'd grown up, and went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day. And since COVID has we've moved through it, or whatever we call this, but churches are open now. I really missed going to mass. And now that I got back to going to church, I think to myself, it's 1 hour out of 168 that we have in the week. It's less than 1/2 of 1% if you do the math, right? 168 and 1 divided by 168. So for me, that's okay. The structure. Why do I go there? People say, "Oh, I don't get anything out of it." And I kind of call BS on them. I'm like, it's up to you to get some. Listen to the readings, right? Let kind of work on you right now. It's not up for the priest or the minister to get. We hope so, but it's not up for them to help you get something out of it. That's something that we need to own. So for me, it's the structure of going there, right? And sitting and going to a place where other people come and share my faith. The other thing that I thought was really interesting here is when he said he unrolled the scroll and found the passage where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me And then he says here, bring glad tidings to the poor, proclaim liberty to the captives, recovery of the sight to the blind, help the oppressed to go free. And when I thought the oppressed go free, I'm thinking about prisoners oppressed, right? And for me, as I reflected on it now, I'm like, okay, where am I oppressed that I might need some freedom? And it's certainly through this COVID situation and pandemic. I think we all need to kind of be free of that. For many times I've struggled with my past, and that's been what has oppressed me. When I haven't lived according to Jesus's teachings, and I've sinned and I've done something wrong and I've made a dumb choice. And then also the anxieties of the world. How many times are they, like shackles, like we're prisoners to all these anxieties and the thoughts that we have. Well, most of the times these thoughts are about something negative happening, what could go wrong. And it reminded me that the other side of that is we can entertain what might go right, what could go right for that. So that really struck me as well, because you think about, Jesus and really what ultimately made him Jesus was his miracles, his ability to perform something that was not explained of this world. And I think that's where the divine comes in, and that's that spirit, which, as is so important to me because we all have it in us. And I think sometimes I have certainly, as crazy as it might seem, there have been times when I've put my hands on somebody who was struggling with an illness. Could be a child, could be a friend, my buddy who passed of cancer. And, I would pray so hard, and I wouldn't do it out loud, but I really, really would just pray for their healing. And to date, I haven't. And I wonder about that. And what comes back to me is just how can I grow stronger in my faith? Because I believe that when our faith is really as strong as it's possible, and for many of us, we haven't scratched the surface, there will be some magical things that we can do, some miracles we can participate in. So I thought about that as well, because without Jesus's miracles, he's not really Jesus. I mean, you think about it, the water to wine, which we heard about, the miracle at Cana, the wedding feast. I mean, he would have said, hey, fill up the water pitchers, and they do. And he would have done whatever he did. And the waiters would be like, sorry, dude, it's still water. If that miracle didn't happen, his first one. And then when the blind man comes to him with such faith, and Jesus spits in the dirt and gets it and rubs it on the guy's eyes, and his sight is cured. Without that, the guy gets the dirt off and says, sorry, still can't see. And the people with such great faith of their friend who was lame and paralyzed, they climbed up on the roof because they couldn't get around the crowds. And remember, they cut a hole and they dropped him down, and this guy was cured. So when you see those miracles that they happened, that's what I saw here when he's been sent to do that. And he was sent to do them to get our attention, to say this is how we should live, and ultimately this is how we should love, right? The energy of God and spirit, I think, is love. And, the greatest miracle of all, which really sealed the deal, so to speak, is his resurrection. Think about if that stone was not rolled back and Jesus was not gone, he would just to this day be a pile of bones in that tomb, on that slab of stone. But that was not the case, and then you read so many people say, well, maybe the body was stolen, maybe, and they say, but they couldn't roll back the stone. And, maybe he wasn't dead. Maybe he survived crucifixion. And if you have any of those skeptical thoughts, I would just encourage you, check out this book called The Case for Christ. The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. It's also a good movie if you want to watch the movie. But Lee Strobel was a Chicago Tribune, I think, reporter, and very successful. And his wife got interested in Christianity and this guy called Jesus. And Lee Strobel was a non-believer. So he said, I'm going to go prove that this guy did not exist and he was not who he said he was. And this investigative reporter tried to do that. And he traveled all over and he talked to all these experts. And I remember the one expert that he was talking about, Rome, and when Rome came up with the crucifixion of criminals and the claim that maybe Jesus wasn't dead, really. And this professor of all this history and all, he looked at him and he said, the Romans did not create crucifixion for survival. And I thought, man, he said, there's no history of anybody having survived a Roman crucifixion. So for me, a couple things to think about, right? The accuracy, Luke's really digging into the facts here. We see the miracles right now. We're reinforced again that the Holy Spirit is there. Jesus goes into the synagogue. So I think it's good for us to go to church and to really be present there. So a couple things that showed up for me this week in doing that. And the The other thing that I'm doing is on Friday mornings, I got invited to a wonderful gospel reflection, a men's group. And I've started to do it for a few weeks now. Prior, it's kind of funny because I thought about doing this Sunday sermon on Monday idea. And then a week or two after that, I get invited to this gospel reflection. So what's cool about that is it forces me to read the gospel before Friday morning so I can see what we're going to discuss. And the other thing that I've done, you might want to try to do this now, is when I do that, I also read like the page that the gospel's on and then 3 more pages. So every Friday now I'm kind of forced in a good way to say, okay, hey, what's the gospel coming up this week? And while I'm into the Bible, let me just take 5 or 10 minutes and read a few more pages. So until the next one, think about those thoughts and always connect with your spirit, and always know that the spirit is there to support us in creating good times and moving through the difficult times. And until next time, always stay firm in your faith. Peace.